Hello there guys, Daniel Childs back here again. It's Tuesday. We have got stuff today about Joao Felix, his imminent move being confirmed at Stamford Bridge, Jadon Sancho, because who remembers 2019, and also the Raheem Sterling situation. I haven't really talked about it yet, so I wanted to give you some of my thoughts and some of the background we've got since what happened before kickoff against Man City on Sunday. Please do like, subscribe, check out the content on the show if you haven't already. We reacted to the Man City game. We spoke about Joao Felix and kind of that move in a little bit more depth. But I think the first thing is obviously on Felix. We know he is basically having his medical. I think it's basically completed at this point. So now it's going to be effectively awaiting the announcement, whether it comes today, whether it comes tomorrow. I suspect it would come before the Servette game. Probably too close now for him to be involved in that game, but maybe they'll do what they did with Neto and present him on the pitch. We will see, but that deal is all going through, and it is believed that very much linked is, of course, Conor Gallagher officially moving finally to Atletico Madrid. So that's all done, that saga, it seems. I mean, maybe there's one more twist at the end of this, but I'd be quite absolutely staggered. I know it's been a bizarre summer around Stamford Bridge, but I'd be quite staggered if that happened as well. But one of the names that was linked today from a Man United reporting perspective, Laurie Whitwell, is Jadon Sancho. Obviously, his Man United future very much still feels undecided. Of course, he's been welcomed back with Erik ten Hag, even though they had the fallout at the start of last season. He was kind of, excommunicated. He went back to Borussia Dortmund, but it appears that United are asking for about 40 million, and there is some expectation or belief from the United side that Chelsea may make an approach. Now, I find this quite comical in a sense because I look back to the 2019, 2020, maybe even before then, when I was on my channel. We were on Let's Talk Chelsea. You can go and find the videos if you want on the playlist. You have to go way back pre-COVID times when we were speaking about Jadon Sancho as a massive Chelsea target. Of course, this is way before he signed for Man United. This is, of course, when he was developing fastly at Borussia Dortmund a very, very long time ago. But it felt like for a while that Jadon Sancho was going to be the big summer signing for Chelsea of that 2020 transfer window, which, of course, went in a very different direction. So Sancho is obviously, in similar ways to someone like Joao Felix, right? If you would have said in 2019 that Joao Felix and Jadon Sancho would be in really difficult places, they wouldn't really have a permanent home, they kind of be by their major clubs wanting to be sold, I think some people would have laughed at you, but that is the place it is, and it shows you that development isn't always linear, it isn't always expected, it isn't always simple, and just because you're a very talented player, it doesn't mean that you're destined to become a great. There are very different variables, and of course with Sancho, it hasn't really ever worked out for him at Man United. He hasn't really adapted to the Premier League, I think, that well compared to his style of play, clearly working at Dortmund a lot better. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Jadon Sancho won't be signing for Chelsea because, listen, Joao Felix looked like a wild target a couple of weeks ago. And although, again, it makes no logical sense in terms of squad building, Chelsea do not need more players. I mean, we've kind of got a breaking point where we actually don't need more players. I mean, you can kind of still argue about centre-forward, but it's bursting at the seams. It really is. Chelsea's big priority, and we'll end this show talking about a player that might be on his way out, is obviously selling players. That's a key of this window now for Chelsea. So I don't think you go anywhere near Jadon Sancho. I feel better about Sancho than I do about Felix, but that's just a personal view. That's not like who I would want to sign for Chelsea. I think for Sancho, I just hope for his sake, because I think he's a very talented footballer, that he finds a permanent home. And that may be PSG, who of course have been linked as well. But yeah, Sancho to Chelsea, wild chat. But I mean, can any of us at this point say with certainty that Chelsea won't go in for Jadon Sancho? If Madueke, Mudryk or Sterling were to leave, I mean, maybe we get some drama there. So one name maybe to look out for. I wanted to bring up this tweet from an accountant about Chelsea. There's been a lot of talk about Chelsea's squad, right? But there is financial reality behind it, what Chelsea have been doing this summer, and why several of us are quite concerned. Justification for it is amortization, incentivized contracts. Don't worry about it. It's all going to come out smoothly in the end. The interesting thing is that rough figures, this is from Christoph21, rough figures, but following this transfer, and that's the Joao Felix transfer, he's got Chelsea's player amortization costs running at £267 million per year. Or in other words, their annual amortization cost is more than the total revenue of every non-Big Six club in the EPL in 22-23. Utter madness. And listen, we keep on coming back to this, that, you know, this is going to have to be paid at some point. And you even get away from whether it, from a sporting sense, creates a coherent and well-functioning squad. I keep on saying this, Chelsea need results. And sooner rather than later as well, this summer is probably one of the last times they can cash in on the academy. Who is it next summer that they're going to have to cash in from the academy? I think if Chelsea don't start winning, you're going to have to start looking at players you don't want to sell. And of course, there's a very obvious one in the first team currently that no Chelsea fan in their right mind would want to see leave. But that is the reality if you don't win and you spend a lot. We see this season how it plays out. Now, Chelsea's issues on that side could be eased by the potential exit of Raheem Sterling. Now, Raheem Sterling, of course, released a statement, or his team released a statement. It was believed earlier than Sunday, but it was released to the public about an hour before the game. I was in a pub near Stamford Bridge when this all came out, and it felt like another mess in what has been the messiest summer I've ever seen from Chelsea. And of course, he wasn't in the squad, and there's been tons of reaction about Sterling post-game. It kind of in some ways overshadowed what happened. I mean, I haven't really covered it because I was more interested in the football, but yeah, obviously this is a big name, and there's been a lot of background talk about it, and now we've seen that Sterling has removed Chelsea from his Instagram account. Now, that may seem to some of you like really petty and silly, but I guess in the world of transfers, in the world of modern social media, it does say something that he would go out of his way to remove Chelsea from his Instagram bio. That's what I saw last night. It was clearly his account. I went and checked myself rather than just taking a screenshot that someone had sent to me. So obviously things are not good. Now, The Athletic reported that sources close to Sterling said that he welcomed the conversation with Maresca on Friday and just asked that Chelsea engage with his reps to clarify his situation at the club. They claim has not yet happened. Maresca's technical decision to omit Sterling against City stands in marked contrast to the manner in which he spoke about the 29-year-old during Chelsea's pre-season tour, which he referred to him as one of our most important players. Now, this is the strange thing about Sterling, right? Because he played all of the games. He didn't start all of the games. He came on late against Inter Milan, and I don't think anyone had him in their starting 11 for the game against Man City. So this is not a case of we've been blindsided. I mean, him not being in the squad, I did find a little bit surprising. And because he played so much in pre-season and the way Chelsea had treated other players in the squad that Maresca or the club don't deem to be part of their futures, very different. You get excommunicated now. You get omitted. You don't get taken on the pre-season tour. You don't start playing. You know, if you compare Sterling to Ben Chilwell, Konichi, or Kameka, these are players that have barely played, and of course Chalobah and Gallagher. So the way Sterling has been treated here is slightly different. I don't like it from Sterling's point of view, and you know, I don't think it was a good move from him, because now you can argue, did it come out at a time when maybe it shouldn't have? And you know, in terms of maybe he honestly felt that this statement was given earlier or should have been given earlier. Whatever the case, it didn't help his teammates. I think Gary Neville made a good point on this, in the sense that, you know, just from a professional looking at your peers rather than whatever frustration you have with the club and everything, an hour before kickoff, an hour before a big game at Stamford Bridge, it doesn't help your teammates, and it creates more chaos and uncertainty in a summer that has already been very tricky and challenging for Chelsea. Now, there is another side to this where this is purely my theory, is that Sterling may have, and I think even Neville and Carragher spoke about this on Sky, is that maybe Sterling has seen what has happened to Chalobah, what has happened to Gallagher. Players who have kept their heads down, haven't said anything publicly against the club, but have still kind of been treated like they have. I mean, not allowed in the first team facilities. And I do kind of ponder, this is where Chelsea's strategy now of trying to get players out the door may come back to bite them very quickly, is because players may not all just take it and not say anything. Some players like Sterling may see the writing on the wall, or may get a whiff that he's about to get the Gallagher, Chalobah, Chilwell treatment and think, I'm not having this, I'm saying something. I don't quite believe he said it and a humble reason to kind of for the benefit of the players around him. I might be wrong on that. I'm not saying that, Sterling is doing anything malicious to kind of undermine his teammates here. But I do think obviously it's he's thinking about his own, career, and that's understandable. But I do ponder if he's trying to get in front, and that's why, the title is called Briefing Wars of this piece, because, it really does feel like this, and we've talked about a lot about this with Chelsea. In a sense, so once you start doing stuff from a club perspective, you're briefing about players rejecting contract offers and trying to get a personal, the reaction, the intended reaction there is quite clear. We've seen this with Mount before. And players start to feel, actually, I've got the power to get out in front of this, because the statement itself, you can't really call as hostile or confrontational. It was very carefully worded to kind of put the responsibility back on Chelsea. The problem with this is that Sterling is on 300k a week. Who is paying that money? Who is putting an offer forward that is going to convince Sterling or the club to sell? I think that's the huge, massive question. And that's the case with several players in the current first team squad. And why the strategy of buying so many players is a massive risk, because if you haven't got the sales set up already, and you're just kind of hoping that Juventus pull money out of somewhere, you're hoping that someone comes in for these players. It's the same with Ben Chilwell. Two players, Chilwell and Sterling, older players in the current squad, who are on bigger contracts, that they're kind of hoping someone comes and pays the money. But as we know in the current market with FFP, with PSR, as Chelsea have just found out with the Felix and Atletico deal, across Europe, clubs aren't spending. They don't have the money to compete with Premier League. And even Premier League clubs, because of that financial situation, for a variety of reasons, are not putting that money forward. Chilwell obviously has injury questions around him, so why would you commit large funds to him? Raheem Sterling is not exactly the standout player at Chelsea, is he? And at his age, is it really financially prudent to go in and spend big on him when you could look at a younger player? The last few weeks of the window are going to be very, very interesting for Chelsea and for Enzo Maresca, because for his own sake, he needs a trimmed down squad. Even with a boosted and hectic schedule, you cannot have a Graham Potter situation again, because problems will arise. You need, at big clubs, I do think you need a bigger squad, because injuries and suspensions and the congested calendar now, I think, forces the biggest clubs and those competitive clubs to have bigger squads, because you have to rotate. That's understandable, especially if you're a club that is already looking at the Club World Cup next summer and factoring it into the calendar this year. But who's actually going to pay for Sterling? And if these players don't leave, the problems mount, because Sterling is not a small name. Ben Chilwell is not a small name. And it becomes a potential problem for you on the training ground, in headlines, and that's something that the club have created, because they've created a situation where so many players feel isolated. Big players or important players, or quite recently quite important players to Chelsea, are being kind of forced out the door. And this strategy of just, you excommunicate them, you don't allow them in the training facilities for the first team, and think that that's how it's all going to work out. Maybe we're seeing the first sign, not from an academy graduate, of this strategy not working. No matter what you think about Raheem Sterling, and I don't think he hasn't been amazing for Chelsea, but players will have a voice, and they will maybe fire back, and the potential ramifications that are not great. So the Sterling thing, unfortunately, is the latest in a very, very long line of, I wouldn't say calamity, that sounds really dramatic, but awkward things for Chelsea this summer. It has not been a good and coherent summer for Chelsea Football Club. They need this transfer window to end. Let me know your opinions on Sterling. I don't think his act is good. I don't think he'll have a lot of fan support for it, and I think rightly so, because this is not a guy who was outstanding last season by any stretch of the imagination. But of course, I think there are deeper things to this. And also, it just is a financial reality. Is anyone going to come in for him? And then if he doesn't, and Maresca still sees him and the club still see him as an outcast, how does that play out for a player who sat there on 300 grand a week? And another example here, nice theory to have incentivized contract, nice theory to want to reward players based on that, nice theory for amortization. But when you've got a player sat on 300k a week who you can't shift, who is going to keep making noises potentially through the media that he wants to leave and is unhappy about the situation, how do you deal with that? Theory doesn't really help that situation. Actual tangible reality and action is what's required. So yeah, we'll see how this plays out. I was going to slightly cover the Chelsea fans being blamed. We may do that. I mean, am I shocked by that after Sunday? No. I could have told you that before the game. And it's been a continuation of this summer that apparently it's supporters' fault that the club isn't being really well managed, and fans feel disengaged and and don't feel happy about it. So apparently it's their fault. Even though I actually felt that, despite of course murmurs at Conor Gallagher's song, some frustrations of us being comfortably beaten by Man City when we were competing against them at Stamford Bridge last year, I actually think the crowd tried as their best to rally up the team, but of course in the end it was a comfortable City win. So we may talk about that as that develops, but obviously we're going to start looking forward to the Servette game from tomorrow. Let me know your thoughts on everything we discussed, and I'll see you again very soon. All the best.